A blind man will never check the real numbers anyway, Richard told my fiancée, right in front of me. I said nothing. For months later, I brought the original server backups to the year-end meeting and ended his career at my company in exactly 3 minutes. 13 years ago, I was 38, chairman of Walkon Group, an eyewear chain I had built from a single counter in Boston to 50 branches across the country. Beside me were the 3 people I trusted most: Rylancha, my fiancé of 4 years; Richard, my head of sales; and Thomas, my driver, since the company had only 10 stores. In my breast pocket was the same gold-plated fountain pen my father gave me the day I got my first job. Then, on a private yacht trip to the Caribbean to celebrate the company's 16th year, everything changed in one afternoon. A compressed air tank on the boat exploded while I was standing near the engine room, which the doctor later described as a rare chemical accident that damaged the retinas of both eyes. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital room in Miami, the world around me just a monochrome black. The doctor said the damage was permanent. For 3 consecutive months after the accident, Rylancha and Richard cared for me as if I were their only remaining relative in the world. Rylancha fed me every spoonful of soup, read the financial reports to me every night, and held my hand every time the doctor came to check on me. Richard dropped by almost every day, saying that the company is still fine, don't worry, I have everything covered. But on some nights when they thought I was asleep, I heard the sound of chairs shifting closer together, the necessary whispers cut short mid-sentence, when a nurse's footsteps passed by, and Rylancha's phone constantly vibrating at 11 o'clock at night. After which she always stepped out of the room to answer. Once, Richard rested his hand on her shoulder a little longer than a normal comforting pat, right when he thought the blind man on the bed couldn't possibly know a thing I didn't know. But there was one thing I believed, something my mother taught me to believe since I was little. God sees through people's hearts, even when human naked eyes can no longer see anything. 2 months after the accident, one morning, I opened my eyes and saw light filtering through the bedroom curtains. It was no longer a deep black void. It was real light with shapes, with the shadows of tree branches swaying in the yard. My private doctor, the only person I informed, explained that perhaps God had saved me that day. The amount of chemicals that splashed into my eyes might have been blown off course by the sea breeze, just enough to turn the damage from permanent to temporary. And my vision would gradually recover over the next few weeks. I was supposed to give Rylancha a surprise, but something in my mind urged me not to do it right now. I lay there looking at the ceiling with my newly revived eyes and thought about the period of helplessness over the past time. In my imaginations about the times Rylancha and Richard whispered, the times she hurriedly silenced her phone and went outside to answer. I wanted to know the full truth about what they had been doing right in front of a blind man lately, whether it was just my overthinking or if there was a much larger conspiracy taking place. I called Thomas to my house, locked the room door, and for the first time since the accident, I looked straight into another person's eyes. I need you to help me with something, I said. But first you must promise not to tell anyone, not even the doctor, not even my lawyer, until I say it's allowed. The first thing Thomas wondered was not what he needed to help with, but rather about my eyes, whether they had regained their sight or not. He hurriedly asked, "Matthias, your eyes." I interrupted his sentence by putting my finger to my lips signaling silence, and nodded in confirmation to Thomas. From that day on, my act as a blind man continued. I let Rylancha guide my hand up every step. I let Richard read me the reports that I already knew he was omitting important numbers from. I relearned how to hold chopsticks without looking, how to clink glasses without searching, how to keep my gaze always slightly misdirected from where the sound was actually coming from, so that no one would suspect. Thomas silently monitored Rylancha and Richard's schedules whenever they said they needed to go out to handle private business. He photographed meetings at a small cafe 4 blocks from the office, recorded license plates, times, and the occasions they left together, and returned 15 minutes apart. 4 months after the accident, Thomas brought me a thick handwritten notebook with no one's name on it, only columns of dates, times, and locations. In it was a line that made me read it 3 times, a meeting between Richard and 2 other board members at a private restaurant in the Back Bay area, without Rylancha present, lasting nearly 3 hours. The topic, according to a waiter Thomas had tactfully questioned, revolved around who would be more suitable to run the company once the chairman's health condition did not allow him to continue. Richard not only wanted to kick me out of my 4-year romance with Rylancha, but he also wanted to sit in my chairman's chair. Once all my calculations were almost ruined when Thomas was copying data from Richard's office computer, a task he could only do late at night when the security guards changed shifts, and Richard unexpectedly returned to retrieve a forgotten jacket. Thomas managed to turn off the screen in time and pretended to be wiping the desk as requested by the cleaning department. Richard looked at him for a moment, casually asking why the chairman's driver was on this floor at this hour. Thomas replied that I asked him to fetch some old documents because the chairman prefers to hear a familiar voice reading rather than letting the new assistant read. Richard nodded, not suspecting further, but from the next day he changed his computer password twice a week. That night when Thomas recounted it to me, his voice was still a bit shaky, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly even though the car was parked still in the garage. "It was almost all ruined, Matthias," he said. If he had flipped that laptop open for just 3 more seconds, I didn't answer immediately. I just placed my hand on his shoulder, the way a true friend would, and said that from now on we would be more careful, slower, without rushing. One night. About a week before the year-end summary meeting, I sat alone in my home office, all lights turned off, not because I needed to pretend to be blind in my own private space, but because I wanted to sit in the darkness that I once thought would be permanent. I took my father's fountain pen out of the drawer, twirling it between my fingers like an old habit. I thought about 16 years ago, the 22-year-old young man standing behind the small glasses counter, measuring prescriptions for each customer with trembling hands because he was new to the job. I thought if that day I knew in advance that one day I would be sitting here, pretending to be blind in my own house, to expose the woman I once intended to propose to, would I still want to walk this path? My questions still had no answers that night. I only knew I had no way back, and there are things that once seen, one cannot pretend never to have seen. The year-end summary meeting took place in the main conference room on the 22nd floor of the headquarters building, with all 11 board members, department heads, and independent audit representatives fully present. Richard stood up to present the financial report. His voice was calm and professional, exactly like someone who had practiced this speech many times in front of a mirror. Fourth quarter revenue decreased by 17% compared to the same period, he said. Behind him was a projector screen displaying images of revenue and sales charts with red arrows plunging downward. Operating costs skyrocketed due to recent approval decisions lacking detailed oversight. The eyes of several board members glanced toward me, sitting silently, both hands resting on the table, wearing sunglasses as usual. "I am not saying this to lay blame," Richard continued, his voice lowering, full of well-rehearsed regret. "But since the accident, Mr. Matthias has been unable to directly review important decisions. This is no one's fault, just a reality we need to face." Rylancha sat next to me, placed her hand on mine, and whispered just loud enough for the 2 people nearby to hear. "You don't have to listen to everything, let me explain later." I took off my sunglasses, not because the twist needed a gesture. I took off my glasses because I wanted to look Richard straight in the eye before he could even understand what was happening. "That number is wrong," I said. The whole room fell silent for exactly 3 seconds. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Richard asked back, his hand still holding the presentation pen. Fourth quarter revenue did not decrease by 17%. It increased by 9%, I said, then stood up, stepping toward the screen. "Because I read the original report from the finance department, not the version you just presented." How did you read it?" Rylancha asked, her voice no longer gentle for the first time in months. "With my eyes, with the very eyes everyone thought would never see the light again after the accident," I said. No one in the room said anything. The projector continued to hum. "How long have you known?" Richard asked, his voice starting to break into short fragments. "Long enough to know who altered the data in the internal accounting system on the night of the 20th of last month, using your exact login account," I replied. "That's slander," Richard said, his voice louder. "You have no proof at all." I nodded toward the meeting room door. Thomas walked in, placed a document folder on the table. Inside was the original data backup from the server login times IP addresses. And even a short audio recording from a tiny microphone Thomas had planted in Richard's office over a month ago, containing a clip of Richard saying to Rylancha, "As long as this number is bad enough, the board will automatically suggest he steps down." "We don't need to do anything else. This is not slander," I said. "This is proof." Rylancha sprang to her feet. "Matthias, I can explain." "You don't need to explain to me," I interrupted, my voice neither loud nor trembling. You need to explain to the company's lawyers, and perhaps to your father as well, who is still confidently investing in Walkon Group. Richard tried to add something about a misunderstanding about work pressure, but the head of the audit committee, an elderly woman named Elena Voss, who I knew had worked honestly for the company for 20 years, stood up and stated that she would recommend the immediate suspension of Richard Coleman's position pending a full internal investigation. I don't remember exactly how many more sentences I said after that. I only remember Rylandsha leaving the meeting room before the meeting ended, without looking back, and Richard being escorted out of the building, in silence by 2 security guards, with no handcuffs, no police storming in. Just a man who once stood at the pinnacle, walking out of the elevator for the last time, with a box of personal belongings in his hands. 3 weeks after that meeting, the board of directors officially confirmed I would remain in my position as chairman, alongside a private investigation conducted by an independent law firm regarding the true cause of the yacht explosion that year. Rylandsha left the company that same week without a word of farewell. I did not pursue any further legal action against her, partly due to the lack of direct evidence related to the accident, and partly because, I admit, I no longer had the strength to hold on to that grudge anymore. On the evening after Richard left the company, I sat in the car with Thomas on the way home, both silent for a long time. I took out my father's fountain pen and handed it to him. "Take it," I said. "But this is your father's," Thomas said, surprised. "That's right, for the past 13 years, the only person who believed me when I was blind, and even when I said I could still see, even when the whole world thought I was blind, was you." I think my father would agree that this pen should be with the most deserving person. Thomas said nothing more. He just took the pen, twirled it between his fingers exactly the way I had done for many years, and continued driving in silence, a silence warmer than any words of thanks. 13 years have passed since that night. I still often wonder, if that data error hadn't happened that day, if my eyes were truly permanently blind as they planned, would I have ever known the truth, or would I have lived the rest of my life in a house full of fake embraces? I don't have a definitive answer. I only know that there is light that doesn't come from the eyes, and there are people, like Thomas, who don't need to wait for me to see before choosing to stand on the side of the truth.